Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anka Majaru, and today I'm really looking forward for this interesting panel together with Oliver Heiss, architect and city planner, as I discovered recently. um, and I hope we will tackle very interesting issues. I have myself questions, but I'm waiting for your questions so we can take advantage to the maximum from this interaction. So, Oliver, who is Oliver Heiss?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the possibility to sit here and to speak to you the next few minutes. The title of the small presentation I'm doing is called Spaces for People. And it should be a mixture of thinking in a three-dimensional box. When you hear the words, I'm an architect, I'm an urban planner, I normally have to do with things like materializing our surroundings, yeah. But if you think about space, it could be much, much more than just the material around us. And coming back to the first two inputs we had that morning, there was a big question. There was the big questions, who are we being serviced to? Well, if I try to give a small answer, it's probably by doing what I have professionally learned, not just fulfilling the program, giving the people space which is not determinated. Well, to make that a little more visible, the program of that thing, for example, was you have to build pools, interior and exterior pools, on a former military space. The problem of that thing was that it wasn't flat and thousand liters of water. And how are you going to put that on that site? Well, being a little inspired by Asian forms of how are they going to plant rice, we built up terraces, and we tried at the very end not to determine everything what's going to happen on that site. And what happened a few months ago was that one. We have more than 6,000 people in that bath. Open pools, the double number of the people who take care of it, you fall into the water, but it was a great event. And even that is what I mean when I talk about left space for the people which is not determinated. The second part of who is Oliver Heiss is I'm the director of the Academy for Further Education, which is the left building you see here. The right one is the Bavarian Chamber of Architects. And there I'm trying to do almost the same things we are doing here, giving people space to think. And that was the second influence we had this morning, thinking about artificial intelligence and all what might happen there. And I think we have another necessity. At first, we have to think about our intelligence, natural intelligence. Artificial intelligence, for me, it's just a tool. It's just like that stick for the termites. It's just, who was there this morning who can remember, but it's just a tool. It's nothing else. Necessary are we, and we are not just human capital. We are humans. This is just me. And for them, I'd like to make a small setup. I've got the possibility to teach a little at the university in Augsburg, a mixture of fine art and social design. And I still haven't found really an answer what is social design, but probably this is the challenge to every day ask yourself, which footstep do you want to leave? What are you service to. Thank you very much for starting with that form. And there is a fourth part of Oliver Heis. Since more than 25 years, I'm working in Southwest Africa, in Mali. Wonderful situations when you see that pictures, but probably you know, since more than 5 or 6 years down there is a war. And a war and extreme forms of climate changing, because we're exactly at the south border of the Sahara. And these people who used to live from agriculture and from building as much as they need for staying alive are now, because of the war, forced to leave their traditional surroundings. And they are now forced, not just 1 or 2 or small families of them, complete villages, 3,000, 5,000 people are forced to build up something like we call in the science, we call that informal structure. If you say slums, it's almost the same. But what we have to learn, I think what we have to learn, is to forget about our usual forms of looking at these structures, because probably we just do not understand how they work. And the more interesting part of it is there a social structure who came with the people, who's still alive, and who has to be respected if we somehow want to interact with situations like these? And that was the traditional form. At the first moment, it looks completely chaotic. It's not. Of course, there is a structure. Like in every society, there is a structure. You just have to learn the rules, and you have to learn the possibilities in it. And also in there, and this is not a rendering, this is Mexico. Of course, there is also a social structure in behind, which makes places like these very, very, very innovative places, and where there's nobody asking for a government who is doing something. These people have to ask themselves and their neighbors, how are we going to manage our lives, and how are we going to the next few hours, the next few days, the next few months? So, yeah, that's exactly the questions for me, where I love to stand up every day and where I asking myself, what am I going to do? I think there is a big headline also in this conference, that means humanity. But there could be a difference if we think of Vitruv, or there could be a difference if we think of the Bauhaus, 100 years, yeah. But they tried to create a new form of community, a new form of society. I personally don't think that's the right way. I think it's the right way to act with the actual society and not imagining just another form of it. There are lots of influences we had in books and in research work the last hundreds of years, but they are all dealing with what? With humans. And I'm really, well, for me it's really, really interesting to answer for myself the questions, why are we not creating our surrounding for humans? Why are we not creating space for people? We have to, because, well, think of your senses. It takes about, how is this working? Is it somehow working? Yeah, the people in the very, very, very back. You see there, this is a distance of about 100 meters. This is almost the maximum distance you can see people, you can recognize them as humans, and you can see what they are doing. So probably there is a connection why 100-meter distances are the same distances you have in football stadiums, which mark the field where you have 100 meters, which is the distance from every place around this football stadium where you can look at the middle of the field. Well, but if you have 25 to 30 meters, this is the maximum distance where if you're shouting, if you're screaming, if you want to say something to your child, where it could hear you, doesn't say if it works, but where it could hear you, and these 25 to 30 meters also are the distance where you can which is the maximum distance where you can explain or see something in the mimic of the people. If it's far, more far, it's not possible to recognize these. So if you think about theaters, these 20, 25, 30 meters are normally the distance to the stage. So now start thinking about a city. How high are the buildings? If mom and dad is shouting from the 3rd, 5th floor to the street and saying, well, you have to come back till, because we are going to do this. Well, normally it's 5 stories high. Normally it's something about 25 and 30 meters where it works, where you can connect to the city, the street. Well, this has something to do with the human size and with the human forms of how are we going to interact with each other. If you think about European places, they are normally almost something with 100 meters long, 70 meters broad, and well, then you can act as a human being in a public space. And so there is also a distance of 2 or 3 meters or 7 meters where we're able to speak with each other. There is a normal distance like this, almost meter to the next of us, and if we do this, it's less than half of your arm. It's less than 50 centimeters. It's intimate, and I'm disturbing your very personal, normally your very personal space around you, because I'm too near for you. Because what I want to explain is that these distances have something to do with us as human beings on this spaceship Earth. And what are we doing? How are we going to handle, knowing all that, how are we going to handle the human scale? How are we going to handle something like we call public life? What are we doing with our public space? Are we really building for humans, or are we building for what? Well, it's not getting better giving us hundreds and thousands of rules, but if in the results this is our public space and we are not able to connect with somebody in this form of public space, do we really have something like a public space? Do you want to get from the one side of the street to the other, if you see that one? Well, the connections we were also talking about in the last lesson. What are we doing here, and why is it necessary knowing about what we are doing here and knowing about our form of comfort, and what does it mean to other people at the same time? How can we start building up sustainable forms of living, sustainable forms of cities, sustainable forms of architecture, if we still think in new products and not in forms of resources which is already here? So one of the main things at the first place, of course, is how are we going to survive? Yeah. The second thing is how can we make our place a safe place? But to do that, we also need, in my opinion, we need the human dimension, and we need a lot of influences for our senses, for us as social beings, that it's possible and that it's not just dreams that have been shown just 2 years ago. This is the crossing of the Broadway and the 7th Avenue in the middle of New York. And as you see on the right side down here, there are no cars anymore. In the middle of New York, in the middle of a land where the car is a completely other symbol than it's probably here in Europe, but it worked that you get people on the street, that you get people in the city, that you get the possibility for people meeting in public. And that it's possible, well, when a colleague who's meanwhile working worldwide is really great. It's young Gail, who has written a book, Cities for People, and who all over the world tries to do the same, what I'm at the moment trying to say, that it's possible not just building for the tools, but building for us. Building for us as people, and making public space, and you did that already here, and making public space a real public value. So we have, I think, or please start with me thinking of what if we change the complete process, if we are not thinking in streets and cars and buildings, but at the first time, if we start thinking of how do we want to interact, which space do we need, and then we're going to add the third dimensional material around. Thank you very much. Mulțumesc.
Thank you, Oliver. It was a really interesting presentation. I had some thoughts and I have some questions, and with your permission I will start this dialogue, and then I invite you, I give the floor to the audience so we can build up a real discussion. You were saying about the spaces that are projections of life, and actually our Romanian cities are a projection of, have these wounds of projection of authoritarian regime that is about power. It's about something that actually stopped, but didn't stop in terms of informal communication of the built environment. How can we recuperate these spaces, these wounds that are out of scale in purpose at that point, so our cities are more democratic, more communal, not afraid of these gigantic public spaces? I think you've seen in Bucharest, we have these big, wide boulevards that are very intimidating for a community building.
Yeah, but I think the main thing which in my opinion has to start is not thinking about the government and somebody else has to do something. I think the main thing is that you're a part of these things that happen. You not get stuck in traffic, you are traffic. At that moment, if you sit in your car and you get angry about all these cars around, you don't have to be angry if you not get a parking space out there, if you park on the footway like all the others down there do. That's a problem that's self-made, and probably that's also a part of the solution. Probably there is a lot of power in exactly that form of, well, if we can change it in that way, we probably can change it in the other. First thing is to realize probably what's happening there, and on another level, Greta Thunberg was also added this morning. She's doing that in a very great way. She's showing us what we are all doing and that we're responsible for. And we don't have to wait for somebody else, we have to act. That's part of an answer, I hope.
Okay. I also believe that we should start on the individual level. And you mentioned Greta. She started a movement, Fridays for Future. And actually, all around Europe and the world, we are recuperating the spaces for democracy. And actually for putting out in the air really important subjects for ourselves. We see kids marching for climate crisis. We see Romanians taking the streets to, enter a democratic dialogue with the government. We see people in Seoul battling. These spaces, I think, they are creating this new type, or actually an old type of public democracy. But is it enough just to gather and take the streets, or we should take a little action so this space is really...
It could, the other way around. What are we searching for? Are we on the... Do we have to reach very, very fast a solution? On the one hand side, that's correct and that's necessary, yeah. But on the other hand side, democracy is a process. And I think it's a success if we're on our way. If more and more of us are changing things, and just small steps, but we are changing things. And if we start getting a united voice, like, for example, Greta did, then I think it's a correct way of acting with each other, discussing with each other, and trying to solve lots of our problems. If we can really reach our big goals, I'm not sure about, but if we're on a way, it's the best. I think it's the best thing we can do at the moment. And if we start talking with each other, if we struggle for the best solutions, that's a big part, and it's much better than there is somebody who is saying, I know how it works, and I'm going to tell you, you have to do it that and that and that way.
And talking about big gatherings, we know that big gatherings create unsafe spaces sometimes. We in Europe have these terrorist attacks that were fostered in the public spaces.
Yeah.
And now we took measures to create a safer space from this aspect of public security. But these measures, from time to time, and I'm talking here about Brussels, let's say, I know better, are not, they diminish the quality of this public space, actually. And how can we re-enter the individual voice in this public security actions?
Well, first of all, as you correctly said, it a terror attack. And I'm sure we will never ever reach 100% security from terror, otherwise it wouldn't be terror. That's the first. Otherwise, if it helps somehow what's happening now, giving the people somehow a feeling of I'm feeling more protected, I'm feeling secure, I don't have to hide in my flat all the day and night because I do not want to go on the street. It's better than doing nothing. But I think it's you're right. It's a big world, big exercise. Not putting up these borders in that dramatic way in our public space, as it's one of the small so-called results. As we do it now, it couldn't be a solution for the future, I'm sure. But in getting a protection of terror attacks, I think it's not possible.
Yeah, I agree, but I never heard. I never heard about I don't know governments working with people just to find the right measures that actually protect the spaces and don't diminish I don't know the fluency of the spaces, the genius loci of the space. I think it's still an open discussion and should. Well, the communities should be involved. But let's take the first question. Okay.
Well, I want to add to the conversation that you're having right now. I mean, the terrorism example is of course is an important one, and it's also a very extreme one, because terrorism is the most adaptive kind of like counter energy in space that you can possibly think of. Like always the counter intent to the intent of any space, because it's destruction. But if we maybe take that one level down and just talk about crime, right? So there are like fantastic examples. I have to immediately think of, I don't know if you're familiar with it, there's a fantastic researcher who has also really researched into kind of the nature of creative practice quite a bit. His name is Kees Doost, is from the Netherlands, but he teaches and lives in Australia, and he's also the director of a program which is called Out-Designing Crime. And it's interesting because it's related to space. So they found out in particular public spaces like train stations, pickpocketing as particular like heightened possibility for crime. And so he was hired with his company to kind of find a solution for that. And they first thought about, well, we have to actually change something about the physical space. But maybe I'm adding also another component to the entire discussion when I say like, well, yes, there's physical space and the human scale is very important. And then there's the information environment, there's semantic environments within the information environment that every physical space, of course, embodies, because it's part of like architectural work, but it enters like an abstract domain, which then immediately goes into human behavior, right, and social systems within a physical space. And they did like a pretty amazing work, because they completely reframed the problem, but just studying the human behavior in the space, finding out that the physical space has nothing to do with it. It just had to do with like the human actors in the system. And I don't want to give the entire case. Look it up. It's fantastic. It's really fantastic, because what they did is they added new human actors into the system, basically at the same age, like people at the same age, so like certain youth, to kind of insert something, I don't want to give it away, insert something that completely diffused, certain tension in the system, and also kind of help to, that certain actors wouldn't enter it anymore in a much more meaningful, a much more human way, actually, than any kind of like, and I really like what you said before, like the idea of finding an ideal, right, and then making that ideal and thinking it changes something, that's not the real work. That's the easy way, right? Like envisioning a new utopian society, anyone can do this. But basically iterating yourself to like a new society that actually works, because it takes the reality of how the human operating systems amongst each other and within their environment actually function, interact with other, and using that capability of innovation, that's what counts. And I would say like some of the work, like what Kees does, is like, it's just, I get shivers again, like this morning. It's like, it's just mind-blowing, right? Because it's such like an unusual way to look at it, and then also act on it. And also at the end of the day, I don't know what it would have cost, like to change like the train stations and then just find out it's making things worse or nothing changes, instead of actually basically changing social dynamics in those spaces through human intervention, not spatial intervention. So, and which is mind blowing. And I just wanted to add this to also kind of maybe go to not discuss this topic in extremes. It's also like I can like poverty versus, but there is a gray zone in there, and I would say, and even that work of Kees Dost is in that gray zone, but often overlooked because it doesn't give you these bold pictures. Only when you look into it, you really find the power of it. And of course, to also add the whole thing, well, there's also an environment that can't be seen, right? But felt and it's influenced by the physical environment. But I saw many other things like social dynamics. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I hope that it was not a question, but it's a conversation.
It was a really, really nice insight. And actually, I popped the question about terrorism exactly to intrigue you and intrigue you all and talk about crimes and, well, way of treating them. Next intervention? Okay.
I'd like to also just add on to the whole terrorism and security thing from sort of two angles. One, in a very macroscopic fashion, I'd like to take the example of France, which is an extremely militarized state. It has been this way for a long time, before the very devastating terrorist attacks. And those attacks occurred even though the military is extremely, extremely present in the public space. So you can see that this sort of intervention doesn't actually even help in preventing these attacks. Germany, on the other hand, which you don't actually see the military in public ever. You don't even see police armed with rifles. But they have an excellent sort of security services which identify these threats and take them away in a very sort of human way through intelligence work, right? And that works very well. The other thing I'd like to sort of in a more microscopic fashion is airports. Airports are an extremely protected space, or at least they give this idea of security, but in reality they're also not protected. It's theater. It gives the idea of security, but it's completely fake. Just a State Department study found, they security tested the TSA, and they were able to smuggle weapons, explosives, and drugs through the security checkpoints 98% of the time. So, yeah.
But on the other hand, if we start looking at places where there is no official form of security, and that was I'm trying to mention when I said I try to understand how slums are working. There is no police, but if there are, and there are lots of pocket pickers, there are also a lot of people who don't want them to be there because they have just a little. They have 5 tomatoes and they want to sell them, and if there is nobody coming to them because they know it's a criminalized zone. They have an interest that the people are coming to them, so they are going to organize themselves in a different way. We usually are used to organize things with security, police, and things like that, but they are doing it, and somehow more humanic, yeah, but sometimes in a dramatical way. But at the very end, the problem is solved, and we just have to learn from these forms of innovations and to understand them probably a little better. Yeah, but there was a question.
Just another annotation to the terrorism thing. me coming from Germany, I've experienced the terrorism attacks not by experiencing the attacks, but the changes in human behavior for like in book fair, on the book fair in Frankfurt and Leipzig. For the last years, it was like you go there, you can go pass through the gate with your ticket, and you are on the site, and everything is good. And now it's like you have long lines of people because everybody's being searched for whatever. And the thing is, I feel the tension is higher because of the security on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of the potential threat, but of the security being there. This is one thing. And the other thing is, David Foster Wallace, maybe some of you know, a journalist, died 10 years ago, and he wrote a small essay about the attacks in 2001 in New York. And he dared to ask the question, in America it's 40,000 people, it was 40,000 people in 2008 dying in car accidents. So this is the price of having an individual transportation system that we are willing to pay. We pay these lives, 40,000 people per year. So is the price of freedom as we know it maybe these few thousand people dying per year through terrorist attacks? And I love this provocative question of him. And nowadays it's popping up again with the attacks in France, but also in Berlin and other places.
Mm. And it's added to the question, thank you very much, and it's added to the questions of mobility, incomplete, a discussion which in the first moment seems visionary, public transport systems for free, but if we start counting what the situation at the moment is costing us, lives, subventions, gasoline, and space, I showed you some pictures, is that really a way in the future, is it? Do you know how many space in the average the cars, just by being put it there, normally need, usually in Europe? How much space does it take for just putting cars at the left and right side of the street?
From the public space.
Yeah. Does anybody know? Just suggest.
It feels like 90%.
Yeah, it's a fourth of the city space. It's between 15 and 25% of the space of the cities. Just putting there that metal thing. And do you know how often you use it normally? 24 hours. How long is it in the average in use? Maximum 1 hour. And how many people are sitting in there? One. Exactly. Exactly. So is this really design thinking for the future? Is this a form of mobility we want to bring in a next step? No. In my opinion, we can't act like this anymore. So the other way around, just start imagine if we have all this, if we have a fourth space, open space, public space in all the cities, what are we going to do with that? It's a great challenge. It's a great challenge at the moment. It's not just something we have to say, oh God, it's nothing working. No, it's a big, big challenge at the moment.
How many, can I ask a question? Because this brings another thing up for me. I'll make it short. How many of you have experienced a space where they basically, like the example that you gave, where they kind of created like an inner city zone where no cars are allowed anymore, maybe at maximum caps, right? Because I grew up in a city that has done that during my lifetime. It's called Lüneburg, close to Hamburg, and it's amazing, right? So like the inner city circle, there are parking lots on the city perimeter. You park and you walk into a city that's completely car-free, even pretty much bicycle-free. Most people don't even bicycle there. That's one thing. Then the other thing is Boston, right? Has done this thing where they took, the main streets of like downtown, one level down, underground. And suddenly the whole downtown area is also all walkable. Completely changed the notion of also, interestingly enough, the feeling of safety in the public space. Same area, no cars anymore, people just walking around, feeling much safer than with the cars, which would almost be a question to you in terms of like, why is that? But my original question to you was, who experienced a space or a city like that where, oh, Bologna, okay. I was also in Copenhagen, which feels close because of all the space for bicycles, so the cars are
I might
not a lot.
add that I think a lot of cities, at least in Transylvania, are experiencing this decluttering of the old city.
Yeah.
But I think it has a little downside, because it's kind of like a turf cut designated for leisure and tourists or outsiders, not for the community. And this public space, from time to time, it's getting disconnect, is my personal opinion. I will open this. But a lot of spaces are eaten by this tourism industry and services. And actually, the city is getting disconnected from its inhabitants. Maybe it's just a transition period, but that's my feeling.
But I think you are looking at different examples, because the city Alexander was just mentioning is quite a small city, and it is for the local people and the local business. It's not on a tourist level. Okay. But you are experiencing is
that's what happened.
Like
that's what's happening in Romania. Yeah,
yes.
That's my experience. But yeah.
But it was not my turn to talk.
There was a question
in the back.
Yeah, thank you.
Coming in the floor.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, thank you for the amazing presentation. I would like to go back a little bit, talking about your work in World Heritage, because if you look at how World Heritage is seen, until now, if you look at the World Heritage list, you'll see that it somehow has an elitist point of view on what to preserve and what not. There is a unbalance between culture and nature, and that is somehow an extension of how we see the world until now. And but there is change. There is Davos Declaration that says that that brings up a new word that says Baukultur is the way we should see what we preserve or not. If for people that do not know what Baukultur means, it means to create your own culture, to build your own culture. And I was curious. Basically, Davos Declaration says that we no longer need to preserve what other people establish for us. We can preserve whatever alteration we do to the landscape. So I'm curious, how do you see implementing that in the future or nowadays through the work that you do or through the work that you've seen? And if you are able, through your limited time in Romania, how you would see that implemented here? Thank you.
Well, I think one of the main things is that we somehow have to act as social individuals. That this works, we have to communicate. To communicate, we have to tell stories. And if you want to tell a story, there has to be a content. And if you want to tell stories about culture, then at the first thing you have to tell what you're doing now and why are you doing it. So you're looking backwards, you're looking in history. And you're telling things of the past, but you're telling it to people who are with you, creating something which is happening in the future. So, and I'm absolutely with you. If we do not understand the main exercise of World Heritage as something to protect it and never change it, then it's dead. It has to get the possibility to react on what's happening in the present, and it still has. That's what culture always does. Otherwise, it's not culture. And there has to be the possibility of changing in everything of these interventions. So it's not really a solution protecting existing buildings. They must develop. Otherwise, it couldn't work. And that was my experience in Mali. Probably it's possible for here as well. There was something, there was something that influenced the facade, the feeling of this city, of this nation, which, of course, is the result of the history, and the acting of people, yes, of course. But we shouldn't forget it to get stories for the future. And we shouldn't blame someone for it, or we shouldn't get afraid of it, but it's part. And that's enough of having a deeper look at it and saying, well, is there something interesting in it? Are there some things, some stories we want to tell again and again?
If I may follow up a little bit, but how, I know that we are talking about integrating and cultural landscape and integrating nature, and maybe stories or interpretation of this cultural landscape must be on the table when we talk about evaluating the World Heritage. World Heritage is referring a lot to the built environment. Right now it's a disproportion.
Yeah.
But we know now that cities and settlements work together with their cultural landscape, and maybe this natural biodiversity should enter the cities, should enter the settlements, to see it as a whole, actually, for evaluating them.
I think we have two questions, one there,
Yes.
and then
Mine actually isn't a question so much as a thing about the cars in cities. I lived in Bologna for a long time, and they have this very interesting thing where, like, the core of the city is close to cars. It's just a couple of streets, but close to cars during the weekend, and you can really, like, tangibly feel the energy change of the space from week to weekend. The roads in the city center are not pleasant to walk along during the week with the cars there, and as soon as the weekend hits and those roads are opened up and everybody is in them, it's amazing. It's great. Anyway, just wanted to say
Thank you.
that.
There.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I would like first to make a remark on cars and city, and then to have a question. I've been last week for the first time in Matera. It's a beautiful city in south of Italy, which is also a UNESCO heritage, and I was a bit disappointed on the old city, seeing that there are so many cars. So as you might know, the city is divided in the old part and the new part, and in the old city is not only the normal cars, but there's a trend right now in Europe with tuk-tuks. And yeah, that was a bit disappointing to me, honestly. And as we spoke on security, cars, and so on, what about the consumerism, the street consumerism, which is bringing a lot of noise and agitation in the European cities, especially the touristical one? Do you feel any change in this area, any desire of improvement on giving up a bit on the consumerism and like opening so many stores for souvenirs, restaurants, and so on? Because I think this is also impacting how we are perceiving the city life, especially in Western Europe.
Yeah, of course. Well, you mentioned and said there is a risk that these places just for leisurement, looking for your free times and for tourism, is probably one of the risks. The other one is that their consumer is, I think, at the moment changing very, very, very much to ordering things on a digital way and getting delivered in ways that weren't thinkable 10 years before now, is changing, of course, that system very, very, very much. But I think we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to do? Do we want to talk to robots, or do we want to talk to people? Where do we want to do that? And probably there is another form of consumer, adding to all that. It could be great for elder people who are not possible to walk to the supermarket, which is 18 kilometers far from I don't know where. But if we have cars who are bringing you there, and you don't have to ride them, if there are, I don't know, airplane taxis, then there is a 110-year-old grandma going to buy there the stuff she needs. Probably it's a different form of consumery as we have it at the moment. But at the very end, if it all helps that people could connect, it's probably helpful. It's not just we're losing a thing. I think we can win something, but we probably should do the right things at the right moment. There is something, we could be dangerous, of course, but it could be a possibility to change things.
There, and back to you, just to give.
Hi, so I'm just following up a little bit on your question actually, and I wrote it down just to make sure that I don't forget it. So my idea was, how do you see developing open spaces when people are more concerned with consuming things and actually connecting with society and with other people?
Are they really? Is it a more, or is it just different?
Well, I'm actually thinking about the old center in Bucharest, where more tourists are going there than local people, and it's more on consuming and going out and having fun than actually connecting and feeling like you're part of the community.
For me, like for Alexander, it's the first time being here. I got the possibility yesterday for a couple of hours, thank you, to get a short but a deep view, a first view into this city. And what I learned was that there are these small garden Edens, these small parks, which are something usable for public space, and then there are streets we'll have to do something with mobility, But at the moment there is a big separation between both of it. It's not both public space. One is the infrastructure, and the other one is needed if it's needed, But it's not a very, not a using of this public space every day. As you probably do it if you go to the city center, where you have other forms of three-dimensional surroundings, and where you have places with other scales, where you have connections with other scales. And I think these forms there is a necessity, and it's not just in the city center. And just with a small view, I got yesterday 3 or 4 hours. I think there is a lack in the city for exactly having spaces like these. I haven't seen them. Probably they are here. I haven't seen them. But so if there is a need for these things, if there is a need for, there are people who want to meet, there are people who want to use space, there are people who want to interact in public, and not just for an event and then there is 3 months nothing, but I want to know my neighbor, and it feels a little more secure if I not just know there is somebody and I'm sometimes hearing it. I've seen the face to it, oh yeah, and 3 weeks later you know how the people is named, and that has all to do with security in your neighborhood. If the people want these things, I think there will be someone, these things are visible here. Probably at the moment there is a need, but it's not articulated. And I think there are a lot of possibilities exactly at the moment here in Bucharest to exactly do these things. For example, Yeah, there's no control at the entrance. Yeah, everyone who knows can get in here. Yeah, of course, and everyone can add his forms of thinking.
Thank you.
It was a question here, I think. Here and then. I think a little bit in Lipscan and in the old city center, we, the citizens of Bucharest, abandoned a little bit the space, and we have to take back that city center, and not only getting out on Saturdays, but opening businesses there, or I don't know, just walking and admiring the landscape. So it's kind of in our hands to take back our city. Thank you. Okay.
Hello. I have a question. Well, it's a question and at the same time a small statement. I heard a lot of questions about tourists coming in the city centers and taking over the city centers or the closed space where there's no cars, for example. In my opinion, it has also something to do with the way we work these days, like maybe in the past 100 years maybe, that the public spaces became just places of leisure because people are really working mostly from 9 to 5, so they don't even have time to interact with other people in these periods. And the tourists are the people that are actually free, so that's why they use the spaces more than the locals. So my question is, does, in your opinion, does it, the development of the spaces, does it have also something to do with the way we work, and maybe in the future, the way it's gonna change because the world is going to change, the working world? Is this gonna have an influence on these public spaces, on the development of these public spaces, if people start working more from home or maybe from outside, or they interact more, they get to move more around the city? In which way do you think these two worlds are gonna grow with each other?
For me personally, yeah, of course, there is a big and a very narrow connection of these circumstances. If we are at the moment in a situation of another form of globalization, of another form of working together with somebody, I don't know, in Australia, in China, in America, well, we don't have to be forced to sit in an office to do what we have to do, because we can do that with a phone, with some sort of connection wherever we are. For a lots of us, not for everyone, but for a lot of us, especially for those who are writing, who are building buildings, who are designing things, who are doing educations, we can do that on a huge form of places. We don't have to do it in an office building. We don't have to do it in a school. We don't have to do it in. So the other way around, when we get this freedom of working, we're losing the 9 to 5 job, yeah, probably. But on the other way, we can do that work wherever we want. And that could mean that it's not just tourists, that it's not just small children or very old people who are using the public space at that moment because you're working. This could be, for the next 3 or 4 hours, could be exactly your working space. Could be. I think there is a big change at the moment, yeah. And I think it's a big possibility for all of us to get something of our public space back. I don't know if you know the movement of the parking day. Does anybody know that? Could somebody explain it for us?
Just heard about it.
You just heard about it? Yeah. Okay. The parking day means that one day all over the world there are groups of people who are officially taking part of where the cars normally stand. They pay for it, and then they put there probably some seats, a bench, And then it's getting something to eat, or somebody's making music or something. Well, you get people on the street, and you just put the metal away. And you have people on the street. And these things, these interventions started also somewhere in America. And what was the second step after that? Not just doing it once a year, doing it often and often and often. And what happened? There was somebody who was clever and said, "Oh, they're out there are sitting people, and they are playing and they are making music, and well, probably they need something to eat or something to drink. I'll make it for them. I'm opening a coffee here. Yeah, great. I'll put some added seats out there, and well, you have more people on the street." And then they start things from the locals and not from tourists to getting back their public space. It works, but exactly as you said, you need the people there. You need them who are saying, yeah, this is our value and we want to have it back.
And I would add that beside changing of the work schedule, we can change the way we teach our kids and, move the school and education in the streets. I think public spaces in ancient Rome or Greece were spaces for debate, for actual growing ideas. And so near our working person, you mentioned school, the idea popped up in my head. I think we can recuperate these spaces for long time forming. I think we are at the end of our panel. Thank you very much for the good discussion. We have the last question. The last two questions. So it's okay that we take these two questions and then okay.
I'm going to be as quickly as possible. Okay, so there has been a lot of talk about taking back our city and getting involved. So a bottom-up approach that would put pressure onto the authorities to do the right thing for the city. So my question is, how can we reconnect people with their own city? Because it's really hard to actually get involved and use time and energy to put pressure on the authorities and turn to tools such as advocacy, grassroots movements, whatever, when you feel disconnected from your own city, when you feel that you don't love the city and the city doesn't love you back or it doesn't care. So there's this gap that needs to be bridged. How do we do it? Thank you.
Well, I think if you feel it like you described it at the moment, that you are disconnected to your city, then there is that much anger in you. Then it's just a very small drop before getting active. If you're searching for organized forms, I think all the democracies, of course, they all have them, and they all have somehow the possibilities to how and where am I, a citizen of this city, allowed to say what I'm thinking of? This is possible, and who else is probably thinking in the same way like I do? This could be very pragmatic first steps of thinking. I do really believe in two things, in this democratic form of politics, and if you think back, in the enormous power of cities. Think back of regimes, think back of kingdoms, think back of nations. They have all been there and they've all gone. But cities, the smaller scale, there where you know people, there where you personally can connect people, they are 400, 500, thousands of years old, and they still exist. They're changing, but they still exist. And I think there is a big power in them.
The last one.
Just a short remark. I'm frustrated. We have this big Piazza Universității in downtown, and it's all concrete, and nothing happens there. It's very cold, and I'm thinking about the Italian model, Rome, for example, where every corner there is a small piazza where people drinking wine and talking and all this. What would be a solution to go in this? Because it's very different from Italy, but it's very nice there.
Yeah.
And it's a real space for humans and for.
Yeah. Probably.
And we do nothing about this with this concrete piazza. It's very ugly.
Yeah.
It's just events with eating and Christmas market, but nothing natural happens. So, what would be a solution? Because we are talking abstract here, but.
So, if you have spaces like these, then we have to do the same thing as in the first presentation. What is the problem? Is the problems that we at that moment are comparing named similars, but they aren't, because they are both places, but those you mentioned in Italy, they are working, have probably other dimensions, they have probably other borders, they have probably fulfilling other needs, and if we just have space.
And so concrete.
Yeah, but that's a great possibility. So it doesn't have to be a place, has it? If there is no need to have a place there, well, it could be probably something else. It could be part of the university. It could be there could be some living. There could be. But it doesn't have to be a place. Probably we need a place, you need a place, which is just 15% of what's there, but who's fulfilling all that, what you were talking of. But then you probably need other three-dimensional borders of exactly that space. But not just transferring this form of materialized problem in the next problem. Maybe there is a bigger change of that space, and it seems to be a good chance thinking of it.
And actually, the last question is from online. Okay, we discussed it. Okay. But thank you very much for your comment, Gabriel, and thank you all for this good discussion. I'm so sorry that it was so short, but I'm sure we open the space for thought, and we have food for thought. And thank you, Oliver, and thank you, Goethe, for creating this magnificent event.
Thank you so much.